Over my life, I've spent a lot of time with people that are wealthy, whether I came across them at school, at work, or at events, and I've identified habits of theirs that make them successful. There are even studies that show that rich people invest differently and think about money differently than those who aren't as successful financially. So today we are sharing those findings, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments as you watch this video if you agree or disagree with these points. And the first difference is that the rich are subtle about their wealth. So stealth wealth is a real thing, and what I've noticed personally is that the true wealthy are not trying to impress you with a fancy car, designer clothes with Gucci written all over them, and posting on social media about their recent trip. The concept is that wealth is more about freedom and autonomy rather than the money that you're spending on discretionary purchases. I think this is especially difficult on social media to tell who is rich or not, and oftentimes you'll have some influencer on Instagram with a Ferrari telling you how to make X amount of money within the first 3 months. And you know, if you didn't know any better, you might say to yourself, maybe I should listen to this guy because I want to be as rich as this person. But the thing with the truly rich is that you can't see their bank accounts. For all you know, that influencer on social media could have just rented the Ferrari for that day just to shoot some content with and then to ultimately sell you a product. When you're trying to take advice from somebody online, especially in regards to money, I think it's really tough because being rich isn't very visual. Let's contrast that to, let's say, a gym influencer who has six-pack abs. Well, if somebody has six-pack abs, I'm probably listening to their ab routine. In the same vein, if somebody has a textbook golf swing and is a scratch golfer or better, I'm probably more likely to watch their content and learn from them because they have the experience to show for it. But with the whole money thing, unless they're straight up showing you their bank account, it's really hard to tell who actually has money and who doesn't. And chances are, if somebody does have money, what I've noticed is they don't want you to know. There aren't many upsides to sharing how much money you have. And rich people know this because there are so many benefits to keeping a low profile. For example, the first one I can think of off the top of my head is the fact that you aren't going to be a target for robbery or theft. If you dress in a jeans and t-shirt type of outfit and look just like a normal person, you aren't drawing unnecessary attention to yourself. Another benefit is that you can focus on the things that really bring you joy and fulfillment instead of getting on this hedonic treadmill of buying the latest and greatest Gucci shirt only to get tired of it after a few weeks and have to go buy another. Now, this is something that poor people might actually struggle with because when they come into money, if someone has never had money before, it's very tempting to be able to go and purchase something that assigns you some sort of status. Because you don't want to be seen as poor because you've probably been seen as poor your whole life, it probably feels really good to spend that money when you get it on something that you feel like you've earned after working so hard. But the idea here is that that's actually a pretty short-sighted approach to building wealth. And that's because point number 2 is that rich people know it takes money to make money, so they often save and invest it instead of spending it right away. Rich people understand the idea of leverage and the fact that capital scales really well. Now, what that means is that the benefits or the returns from having more money increase proportionally as the amount of capital itself increases. Let me explain. For example, if you were to invest $100 in an index fund that tracks the market and you got a 10% return in 1 year, that's going to be $10 extra. But if you had $100,000 in the same fund, you would get a 10% return, and that amounts to a $10,000 return by getting the same 10%. In both scenarios, you're investing in the index fund, and sure, with $100,000, you are technically risking a lot more capital, but because you are operating with a much bigger amount, your return proportionally is a lot higher. And that's why I think there's such a focus to grow and save your wealth with rich people instead of spending it earlier on in their journeys, and people who have accumulated wealth really understand this. They know that if they're able to get their nest egg up to over 5, 6, or even 7 figures, that the compounding will take over and they have to worry less about money overall. When you're poor and you're trying to make your first $10,000, usually you'll have a lower income, bills to be paid, and a $5,000 emergency incident could actually set your net worth back 50%. Now pretend your net worth is, let's say, $500,000. If you had a $5,000 emergency incident, it only sets your net worth back 1% instead of the 50% like in the earlier example. So the point here is that if you aren't at a 6-figure portfolio or savings yet, this is what you should be laser focused on. We want to get to a point where our money is starting to make money for us. That way it becomes more of a virtuous cycle where our money starts to earn more money, which then grows your total capital amount, which in turn grows you more money, etc., etc. And that brings me to point number 3 today, which is that rich people understand the power of delayed gratification. They know that if they can resist the temptation of an immediate reward, they'll get a way bigger bigger payoff later on in life. Think about this with the context of the previous point. So let's pretend you make a daily impulse purchase of $10 per day. Every time you make this decision, instead of saving that $10, you are killing your progress towards a bigger payoff later on in life. And people with a poor mindset might not see it this way, and they may choose to spend their money on the things that will make them feel better in the moment instead of delaying gratification. The Money Guy Show on YouTube has a famous saying, which is that $1 at the age of 20 is worth $88 later on in life. So let's actually listen to this clip.
It's the reason why you see us carrying these koozies around. It says this $1 beer cost me $88, because we know that a 20-year-old has a wealth multiplier of 88.35. That means that every dollar that a 20-year-old invests, if we assume a 10% rate of return compounded on a monthly basis, can turn into $88 by the time they get to 65. It is amazing how powerful your dollars can be if you give them enough time to grow.
That means that every purchase you make while you're young could be worth a heck of a lot more later on. And even if we use a more conservative variable, such as 8% rate of return compounded annually and not monthly, we can still see that a dollar could be worth around $31.92 in 45 years. And delayed gratification here is the key concept that will make you very, very rich later on in life. You have to give up some of the things now for a much better financial life later. I've also found that can help you with your decision making. So I find in life, whenever you have a decision that you're contemplating in the short term, if you stretch out your time horizon to say 10, 20, or even 30 years, your decisions in the moment will be a lot easier and clearer. I personally remember a situation in my career when I was contemplating switching departments to marketing at the mobile video game company I was working at, simply because the people in marketing were paid a much higher base salary. The short-term thinking in me wanted that extra pay, but then when I zoomed out on my life and thought about my career as a whole, I didn't really see myself doing marketing in, let's say, 20 or 25 years. So I think having delayed gratification and stretching out your time horizon, those kind of go hand in hand. And when you think about your life in that sort of way, you are going to make better decisions and hopefully be a lot richer. The fourth difference between rich and poor people that I've personally noticed is that rich people overwhelmingly love investing in assets. Poor people might just leave their money in their savings accounts and not actually trust the entire financial system. Now, the definition of an asset is that it's a resource with economic value that will provide a benefit to you at a later point in time. So ideally, when you invest in an asset, it goes up in value, and perhaps it can even pay you for owning said asset. So here's a great graphic that actually kind of shows you how wealth is made up at different net worth tiers. You can see at the top and bottom rows, these are all types of assets that people own. As you get into the higher net worth tiers, business interests, real estate, stocks all become a bigger and bigger portion of their breakdown of wealth. So a business interest would include something like owning a piece of a private company or partnership or corporation that can generate you income and appreciate over time, perhaps even in the form of stocks. Real estate can also appreciate as well and provide rental income, and stocks, in terms of the general equity market, can also generate you interest, dividends, as well as capital gains. You can see that a large majority of the assets that rich people own typically go up in value, or at least generate some sort of cash flow. At the lower net worth tiers, 10K or 100K for example, the value of the primary residence is the biggest asset by far, followed by vehicles, which I thought was pretty surprising. Now, while cars are assets, a lot of them are depreciating assets, so just make sure to keep in mind that when you are investing in assets, you're trying to aim to get an actual return out of them. Now, while this graph isn't the end-all be-all of the differences between rich and poor people, I do think it's a good starting point to see what the breakdown of wealth is between, let's say, someone with $100 million in net worth versus someone with $100K in net worth. All right, point number 5, rich people know money management is crucial to wealth. In general, rich people understand where their money is going at all times. Now, that doesn't mean they have it tracked to the exact dollar amount, but what I'm more trying to say is that in general, if you know how much you make, how much you're spending, and the amount of savings that you have, you're setting yourself up for success down the road. Rich people typically aren't overspending based on their income, and these days, because of social media, it makes you feel like you need to spend in order to keep up with everybody online. According to a recent Credit Karma survey, 38% of Gen Z and 28% of millennials say that they've been influenced to spend money that they don't have on travel after seeing other people's vacations on social media. And so I think if you can manage your money with a good framework in mind, you can actually change your trajectory of your financial life. A good money management rule that I made a video on is the 60-30-10 rule, which states that you can spend 60% of your budget on needs, 30% of your budget on the things that you want, and 10% can be allocated towards savings and investing. And what I found is that a 10% savings rate is just enough for you to not only retire comfortably off of, but you can also get to a millionaire status one day, if not even higher. So here's an illustration of that. Let's pretend you make $50K per year or $40,000 a year after tax. Now assume your salary stays fixed over your entire career. So you do the same thing, you make the same amount of money throughout your life. But the main difference is that you're able to invest 10% of your income consistently. So that's $4,000 per year from the ages of 25 to 67. This alone will let you hit a balance of $1.314 million by the time you're the age of 67, assuming 8% returns on your money. And this 8% return can be achieved through investing, which can be done through investing in the S&P 500. I would actually argue that it's a lot easier to save 10% of your income when you know exactly where your money is going in the rest of your budget. And this is a habit that many rich people have, which is they know where their money is going, and money management is very crucial. And I think you should adopt it into your own life. Point number 6 is that rich people have excellent credit and they know how to leverage it. In order to get good credit, that means you aren't overextending yourself when it comes to consumer debt or even auto or perhaps mortgage debt. Now, in order to have an excellent credit score in the United States, you should be making payments on time. And in general, the lower percentage of a credit limit that you use, the better your score becomes. Now, what's really fascinating to me is that you cannot miss a payment basically ever in order to have excellent credit. For example, if you had 95 on-time payments out of 100, you would think that's pretty good since that's 95%. But what I've actually found is that anything less than 97% is actually considered poor by the credit bureaus. We actually need to be above 99% to be considered very good and at 100% to be considered excellent. So do whatever you have to do to pay on time, set up auto pay, set up calendar alerts, have an accountability friend. This is just going to be very essential in order for you to keep your credit score high. Now, one huge benefit of having a good credit score is, for example, lower rates on loans. So let's say you want to buy a $500,000 house in Texas. With a good credit score, you might qualify for a 30-year mortgage at a 6.5% interest rate. Now, if you had an average credit score, your interest rate might be a little bit higher, 7%. Now, that's just a 0.5% difference. Now, that 0.5% difference in your mortgage rate could actually amount to over $39,000 in saved interest over the course of your mortgage. And all of this benefit just comes with having a higher credit score. Rich people understand this concept well, and I would hope that if you don't have a good credit score, this should be a good enough reason for you to want to pay attention to it. Lastly, a huge focus of rich people is continuing to educate themselves throughout their lives. I feel like there's this focus on continuing to have a thirst for knowledge, such as consuming books, podcasts, going to live seminars, meeting other people, and asking a ton of questions that will really separate you in terms of wealth. Like yourself, for instance, you are watching this video right here. Thank you. I would argue that you are at least taking one small step towards educating yourself more and more. And by doing so, you continually will find